Chad McArthur interview, take one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. How you want me to hold it?
I think you can hold it like this.
Right.
So one of the most, well, actually, this is like a full circle moment for both of us because how did our relationship kick off in high school? Like we knew each other before, but how did it
that's
kick off
how I
in high
wanted to
school?
start it. But I think it goes before high school, which is cool.
It does.
So we started, when did you first come to my school? Grade 3?
All the first memory I have of us is you pretending to pull your hamstring running the 100-meter dash the first year that I beat you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
grade, that was grade
grade
6?
5?
No, that was grade 6. I know
grade
for a
6
fact.
because I left. I got
yeah,
off
you
the
left
next year.
after because you were so embarrassed that you pulled your hamstring.
That was it. So
Yeah.
grade 6, then we skipped to, when did we really get to know each other in high school? Grade 10, I would say?
I would say
So
grade 10 because we had
15,
coding class
16.
together. Mm-hmm. And then in coding class,
I started playing Fortnite.
you started playing Fortnite, and then I was playing Fortnite. And it's crazy how video games just bring you together. But so we connected through that. And then what? I just started editing stuff.
Yeah, I was always into content creation and just trying to, everyone, I think our age group was just, we got to make it on YouTube. Like that was sort of the craze.
Right.
And then, I needed a video editor. I was streaming almost more than I was at school. Like as soon as I got home, 6 to 9 hours.
I remember there was like
stream.
a good few weeks that you streamed for like 7 hours right after school.
Yeah. Yeah, my teachers weren't happy, but that was that was the reality of it.
But you try things, right? So we knew each other through Fortnite. We were connecting really well there. Mm-hmm. And then you had hired me for $20 bi-weekly. I said, I'll do it for $20 bi-weekly to you. And you said, okay, you know what? Deal. And I was your editor. And I was editing all your Fortnite stuff. And then that's when we really started connecting. And our relationship went from, like, we always had a business relationship before anybody else really even talked about business in high school at all. And you could kind of see what I was doing in relation to business as I was growing. But then what was funny is what happened after you hired me. When I started my business, what did we do?
Yeah, I started working for you.
Yeah.
So we, it keeps kind of going full circle. We just go back and forth. But yeah, then I was working for you for I think almost 2 years.
It was crazy, and you were running my whole podcast. Mm. So that experience, what did it teach you?
Yeah, that was really the inspiration to starting mine. I think as I was sort of writing down the questions, one of the first ones was just like what inspired you to start. And I think right from the beginning was meeting gold. So for those who don't know, Sam started Vision Lux, which was a media and
marketing
creation sort of a company. And yeah, I was kind of a little bit of everything. It was that startup stage where it was just like a little bit of admin.
I was paying you 16 an hour.
I think I first started video editing. That was what got me in the door. And I hated video editing. Like it was just not my thing whatsoever. But I knew A, I needed the money. And B, it was just, hey, this can get me in the door somewhere and I can kind of grow from there. And that's what I've always believed in, is just getting yourself in the door. And then once you're in the door, you can always find and create your
Well, and the
career.
other thing too is there was no ego attached to it. So what was cool was that you didn't have an ego working for me and I didn't have an ego working for you. And what's funny is when we told other people that like I worked for you in high school or you worked for me in grade 11, they would laugh. They would almost be like, oh, like you're the runt to the litter or something like that, vice versa, right? But we didn't see it that way. We just saw it as, well, we're helping each other achieve our dreams. And we know that we'll just be in it together, till the sun goes down, right?
Yeah, it's that sort of friendship that you have when you've grown up with each other for that long. I think it's hard to almost switch to a business. Like anyone you meet today with your business, you're always going to have that business mentality first. But we knew each other when we were running around on a playground, like messing around with each other. So
it's a completely different relationship.
It's a completely different realm of how you actually see and interact with each other.
So the cool part about meeting gold was that, well, I guess what do you felt you took away from that whole 88 episode experience? Because you were there for a good, what?
I would say 50
to 60 episodes
50
for
to
sure.
60. So to give an idea of what meeting gold was, you sat down on a weekly basis with a local, but even it expanded to international guests from around the world, and you interviewed them for about an hour. It was super generalized into their career, what they were working on, sort of their passions, their career journey, and how they got to where they were. And I was behind the camera on almost every single one of those in some form or another. And that inspired me. I was like, how can I start to do this, but on a soccer specific sports business mentality and kind of grow that space.
What I'm just confused for everybody that understands why soccer. Like I don't understand what the obsession with soccer is.
Yeah, to go back, I always ask on my podcast, the first question is, what is your first soccer memory? And for me, my family's South African background, and the first soccer memory I ever had was watching the World Cup in South Africa with my dad. Like, I remember it still to this day. South Africa scored. They played the first game against Mexico, and they scored this like crazy goal. Like, it's still played today, and that's just ingrained in my head. Like, that passion that I had, I didn't even know what was going on. I didn't remember the player. I didn't know anything about it. I just remember the goal, and I was 7 at the time. From then, I signed up for soccer, and it was like, there's people that enjoy soccer, and then there's obsession, and I think people don't understand the difference, where there's people that play soccer and enjoy watching it, but my life like revolves around soccer. Like, everything I do, my Instagram feed, my TikTok feed, everything is soccer.
What's the bigger message to you? Because like, I know you, and I know that there's a bigger message to soccer and how it relates to life. What is that?
Yeah, I think that first, what you're saying, I think is, when I first started enjoying soccer, I realized it was more than just a game, is sort of what you're getting at there. And it was a global game. It was the most global game where everyone in the world knows soccer. And for me, my two big interests from young were travel and soccer. And nothing you can really combine like that. If you're a hockey fan, you can't go to South Sudan and go watch a hockey game. That's not a thing. But I guarantee you I'll find a soccer game somewhere near as soon as you land.
Like, there's a sense of patriotism towards soccer that you don't find in other sports, really.
No, the passion is totally unmatched. Like, you see it you see glimpses of it in other sports, but it is your life. When you become a fan of a team, that's your family. That is what you do every single weekend. Your whole week revolves. They talk about the idea that you drink to celebrate and you drink when you lose. There's sort of that idea that when you're in the UK, for example, like that is what it is. You go to the pub, win or lose, and your week revolves around, did we win that game or did we lose? Am I depressed for this whole week, or am I joyful and having the best time of my life? That's just what a soccer, I should be saying football fan, but we're in North America. But a soccer fan, that's what their life revolves around.
Yeah, there is a sense of patriotism, and the reason I like watching soccer is because it's almost like you're watching a war match between two countries going at it. Like, you're watching Italy versus England, and it's like the coolest thing ever to watch that. Even though Italy wasn't great this year, but what are you gonna do? Okay, so to tie it back to the podcast, because I want to know, just to build a sense of why you're doing the podcast. You love telling people stories, but what's in it for you?
Yeah, so I'll go back to kind of the start of meeting Gold and working with you as sort of the first inspiration, but I would have never started a podcast off the back of that because it wasn't a passion of mine at the time. And then I spent 5 months in Europe, and that was like the real turning point of, okay, I need to start a podcast. And that 5 months, I could have spent it just traveling and enjoying life and just having that as a part of as a thing to tell people about, as what I did. But I wanted to make it really purposeful and go into it as like I want to build a career in sports business, in soccer specifically. So how can I use this 5 months and the amount of money that I'm spending to actually make it worthwhile? So I went on LinkedIn. I basically spammed anyone that was in any city that I was traveling to and just said, hey, I'm here for X amount of time. If you're interested in coffee, please let me know. You
traveled for 5 months all alone, met the most incredible people. You did something that not even I have the balls to do. What in your brain switched from high school to just saying, F it, I'm going to go travel?
Yeah,
most people don't do that.
No, I don't think I know anyone else. One of my friends came with me for part of it, but not the whole time. My dad was the biggest inspiration for that, and I think in many things I do, you know me more than most people. My dad's my inspiration for literally everything I do, and he traveled when he was young. He left his family, he left everything that he had, and just went, and didn't really have a plan. I didn't really have a plan, but there was still purpose in it, and I think you gain. They say school is where you gain your education, but I know for a fact that it's not necessarily. You do gain some standards of education, but there's so much education in just going out and living and experiencing other cultures, experiencing other people, language. There's so much that you learn from the daily interactions of the reality is you're 6-7 hour plane ride away from home or from anything that you know. And so I remember we were in non-English speaking countries for about 2 to 3 months straight. And like your head actually starts to like turn. You're like, I just want to speak English to someone.
Right.
I want a native English speaking, and we landed, I think our first country that was English speaking would have been England or Northern Ireland. And there was just this sense of like, okay, people speak English here, like this relief that kind of
It's interesting. This did something for your confidence. Like the Chad that I knew before, even like high school growing up, you were really shy. Like you weren't the most outgoing guy I knew. But then you slowly started to develop that skill. Do you feel like Europe was the thing that just made you the most comfortable in the most uncomfortable situations?
Yeah, I've always wondered, like people ask me, what's your like personality type or how do you kind of work in terms of communication and working with people? And I think I sort of have a mix, and it comes from my parents, I think, as well. My mom is totally not outgoing, like super shy and laid back. And my dad is a complete extreme. Yeah. Like we'll talk to literally anything that moves. And so I think I've always had that mix where once I'm comfortable in a group, I'm able to kind of open up and speak more. But as soon as it's a group that I don't really know, I'm kind of laid back and I don't really speak too often.
But I feel like it changed in you when you went away.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think one of the key things, a quote I always say, it's seek discomfort. So it's from Yes Theory that we both watch. And it's that idea that you want to try, for me personally, I try and find areas of my life where I'm not comfortable. So maybe it's doing this, for example. I've never done a one-on-one interview, or we've done maybe a few in the past, but nothing to this degree. And it's going out and actually seeking that discomfort and the growth. And I was speaking on education, but the learning and growth that you get from those experiences are unrivaled to anything else. And that's, I think, where we're leading to there, where it's that idea that the more you seek discomfort, that's how you grow. And if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not growing, because you're in the same bubble that you're used to all the time.
Part of discomfort that makes it so hard to seek it is that so many people live in the norm and so many people live inside the lines every day that they can't branch out. And so you don't feel like you can branch out. When it comes to the negativity that you've received, I know when I did my podcast, or at least when I first started, I received a lot of negativity. My YouTube channel, I received a ton of negativity when I had Super Sam back in grade 9. So how did you go about navigating that and not allowing that to affect your mindset to stop producing these podcasts week by week for the last 52 weeks? And how did you just not cave to it and just stay inside the lines?
Yeah, so I hate to bring it up, but it's a quote that I always live by. And Mr. Beast, funny enough, he actually said it. He said, "You're crazy until you make it." And it's that idea that everyone thinks he's starting a podcast, he's filming himself on YouTube, he's making TikToks, whatever it is. And everyone thinks you're crazy. Like, why are you doing that? Because you're being abnormal. You're not doing what everyone else is doing. And until you make it, until you become the Mr. Beast or the Jeff Bezos or whoever that key figure is, then all of a sudden everyone goes, "Oh, he was lucky. Oh, I can't believe he made it. Oh, what are the chances of that? Why can't I have that?" And so when we're speaking on that topic, I think that was something that I always looked at, that you're always going to get the negative feedback. Everyone always goes negative first. There's never that. No one ever looks at a TikTok or an Instagram and tries to find the positive out of that, or it's very abnormal for someone to look at it that way.
Right.
So for me, it was, I'm going to get the feedback, but it's just that you try and keep that mentality of like, who cares? Like, they don't actually care that much. They're just saying that just to get it out of themselves.
That's true.
Like, that's something that they're battling with in themselves.
Have you noticed that your friends around you, or just the people around you who are your age, who aren't as motivated, I guess you could say, have almost felt insecure by your presence as you've done more of this branching out and spreading outside the lines?
It could be looked at that way, and I think it's tough for that age group as well, because I think in some ways I'm very mature, I guess is the word you would say, for how I'm approaching life, but everyone's on their own journey and their own path. So just because I'm doing this now doesn't mean one of them might be doing something similar in a few years. And I think even for myself, I would have looked at you sometimes and been like, wow, he's being really bold with how he's making a podcast, or now he's got a TV show, or whatever it is. And I would have even looked at that in a negative lens in some ways. So I think everyone sort of can look at it with their own point of view and their own personality, but at the end of the day, you're yourself, and you're the last. Whatever you're thinking is the last things that you'll think of. And most people will actually forget that you're doing a podcast or whatever it was. When I first posted it, sure, some people might have come up to me, "Oh, you're making a podcast," whatever. Now people are like almost more interested. They're like, "Oh, who do you have on this week?" Or like, what's happening with the podcast? How are you doing? Like, Where are you traveling to next? That sort of thing.
Can you describe to me the moment where it all clicked for you? Where were you? What were you doing? Where was your head at? The moment that you realize you have to do this because you have an obligation to live up to your fullest potential.
Yes, you're saying the start of the podcast.
Right.
I would say as soon as I got back, this actually leads to another question that I wanted to answer. The scarves on my background. So everyone always asks me, the first meeting I have with anyone is always, what's the deal with the scarves? So I collected scarves at every single game I went to in Europe. I went to like 20-something games. So the whole wall is just covered from top to bottom. And the moment it clicked, I was sitting in I have sort of a little office like studio space in my basement, and I was sitting there in my chair. I had the scarves on the background, and I don't know if I opened FaceTime or I opened one of the apps where you actually see yourself and you see the background. And I'd constantly been thinking. I watched My First Million, which we both listened to, another podcast. I had worked for your podcast and helped you with the production side. And it was this sort of moment of I had met all of these great people in Europe through LinkedIn, 40-something people that I had meetings with. So it was like, how can I continue to do this on a weekly basis and just meet? There's so many people to meet in the soccer world, in the sports business world. So how can I continue to do that on a weekly basis? And that was when it clicked, like, sure, I can do the in-person podcast way, but it's a ton of work, a ton of capital. You know more than anyone.
Oh, yeah.
And so for me, it was like, but realistically, I can get on Zoom. I use Riverside, which is a similar software, but for podcasts. I can get on Riverside. I can record a video within an hour. I can have that conversation, which is the most important part for me, is that actual human connection. And then I can post it and others can learn from it. And that's the beauty of it.
Talk to me about some of the moments where Chad's mindset have developed over the course of these last 52 weeks running this podcast.
Yeah, so in lead up to this today, I actually went back to like episode 1, 2, and 3 just to see, because you don't notice growth as you're going through the journey, but you have to actually look back and realize like, whoa, this was awful when I started. And I still to this day, I look at my episodes and I know I watched your episodes, I watched other people that inspire me, and I go, okay, I'm still nowhere near where I think I can be, but I'm getting there. I'm slowly making progress. For example,
one step a day.
Yeah, exactly. It's always that 1% each day is crazy once you multiply it. And so that's when you talk about growth and sort of mindset changes. At the beginning, everyone always says at the beginning of a journey they're naive or they don't know what they're doing. And I think you sort of stay that way until you unlock that kind of next chapter. And yeah, I was looking at the beginning and like I was stumbling over my words, like I'm this, that in every sentence. And even now to this day, like I say curious a ton in my episodes. Like I try, like it's my one thing that I'm like trying.
Everybody always has one word that they just fall back on, and it's the most challenging thing.
Yeah, every question I start, I'm curious. But I think there almost is a sense of like that immaturity of like, I actually am curious. Like I'm super curious on the answer to this question. So although it's a pattern of speech that I repeat, I think it's important where your mentality, like you're saying, your mentality does change over time. Where at the beginning, although it was just 1 year ago, which a year of change can be extreme, but it can also be fairly similar to what you are now. I realized like, whoa, like even though the way I look, I feel so much immature. Like there's so much growth that has happened. And
well, Barbara Walters always said, and Barbara Walters, if you don't know who she is or anybody listening, she was one of the best interviewers of all time. She was great at stories. She was super point blank, but she always said that every good interviewer comes from a genuine sense of curiosity, which is something that you seriously do have. You've always been asking people questions, and you've always taken an interest in what they're doing, and you're very, very visual when it comes to watching how they do things. That being said, you have had the opportunity to interview 52, or I guess in this case 51 plus yourself, 52 people on their life story, how they've grown, and ways that they developed their career as well as their personal self. What have you learned in that process? What things have you been taught that you wish you could quickly get to another 20, 25-year-old in this space?
Yeah, so when people ask me sort of my inspirations leading up to starting it, I always say that it was out of a pure curiosity of learning about people, but I love what I do each day because I'm learning. And so that's the number one thing, is just the actual learning of each episode. Everyone is so different. I can find 2 coaches from the US that followed a similar pathway, and their storylines are completely different, even though they might come from a similar background. And so I think number one lesson is that everyone has such a unique story, and there's so much you can learn from each story. Like I really, my goal was to not just go surface level on the podcast. I think there's guys like Stephen Bartlett who really do a good job of like deep diving into who this person is, what their life story is, like what they're working on, their career, that sort of thing. And so I didn't want to go fully deep dive like a Stephen Bartlett style, but I wanted to go in with a sense that I'm learning more than just your general career or what you work on. I want to also learn about the person. So I started. You'll see if I ever post the format of my podcast, there's a section called the Insider's Lounge Favorites, and I kind of announce it through the episode. And that's where we really deep dive into like what was your greatest challenge or setback, and like how did you learn from it? Or even the quick fire questions at the end, someone's favorite quote or a quote they live by, or who they would sit. You learn so much. The last question I try and always ask is one person you would sit down with, and dead or alive, and what you would learn from and why you would want to learn from them. And that simple question, you gain so much of an understanding about that person. And I think for me, I'm 21 now. Every person that I interviewed, for the most part, was older than me. Let's say 50 people were older than me. Yeah. So those people range from late 20s all the way to 40, 50, 60 years old. And they've lived my part of my life already. They've lived 22 years old, 23, 24, 25. So that I can gain insights from each one of them. And I can also gain insights in the sense that, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that, or I shouldn't do that. And for people that don't know, I have an older brother, 4 years older. And that was sort of how I looked up to him. He was making a ton of mistakes, which is just part of life. That's how you learn. But for me, it was like, okay, he did X and my dad reacted in this certain way, or this happened to him in terms of his career. Maybe I shouldn't do X, I'll do Y instead.
What was the most impactful mistake that you heard on your podcast that really taught you something that you know you'll never do again, or you'll never do in general?
Yeah, it's tough to point out specifics, I think, but I think there's ways you can do it in terms of like mentality. So certain people thought much more of themselves at a younger age, for example. So they thought they were the man and that they had already made it. So like, for example, I was even discussing with some coaches about a Brazilian game recently where a bunch of these young players, they're in their 20s, fighting each other like in the middle of the game. And we were discussing how that Brazilian mentality in some of the youngsters, where they have that, they call it the full fridge mentality. So a few Brazilians that have come on the podcast have actually mentioned this, where it's the idea that if you have a full fridge at home, you're never actually going to make it as a footballer because you already have enough. And so if you look at some of the best Brazilian footballers, they come from the slums, like from the lowest of the lowest points of civilization. And so for me, looking at that, I'm like, whoa, like here are these guys coming from literally nothing and like have nothing to look back on. And so they have that mentality of like, if he's got a full fridge, like I'm already better than him because I got nothing at home. So my footballing ability is what's going to pay the bills. And so when you have mentalities like that and you learn all these different, that's what I'm mentioning about cultures. I always speak on the idea that language and understanding culture, you can, let's say you're a Spanish speaker. I can understand you if I understand Spanish as well, or I can understand you if I know your culture. So you come from a Spanish background, although I don't know your language, I know what you've come from because I visited places. I understand the Spanish culture. I understand the food, what you're doing on a daily basis, the things that inspire you. And so for me, my travels plus the conversations I've had with people from around the world, I start to learn the culture more than the language because I only know English. But from learning those cultures, every culture is so unique and has advantages and disadvantages. And I think if you can add up all those advantages, like the full fridge mentality from the Brazilian culture, and there's all these different cultures that I've been able to experience now, you kind of learn from each one, and you take all the like, this is really good, yeah, this is good, and then you can kind of combine it. And I think that's what's made up my personality today.
One of the things I'm curious is like, when you look at balancing responsibilities, you know, you've got a lot going on. I mean, a lot of people make the excuse that while they were working at Sport Check, they couldn't go start this podcast because they were just too busy, but they also had to have a social life and they had to have this and they had to go out and do this. How did you go about balancing that? Or was there no balance at the start? Did you just go all out and just focus on this?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. One of the promises I made from the beginning, which is something we had as well, was consistency. Whether it was I post every 2 weeks, I post every month, I wanted to make it as consistent as possible. And I kind of went extreme with the consistency. I said, okay, I'm going to post every week a full episode, and then every single day I'm going to post a new 1-minute clip. And I think that's an extreme level, and I'm going to continue to do that because I started that way.
Okay, I'll just make this very clear. You have, and what's funny is weren't we meeting at Starbucks outside on the patio literally a year ago around this time discussing this? You were telling me you want to do the podcast and make it consistent.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I remember you saying that, and you've done it. But like, how did you know that you would just stay consistent with it?
Yeah, I don't know if there's something where I like knew from the well, I did know from the beginning. Like the reality was like if I start something, I'm going to complete it, and I never set like an end goal of like, okay, once I hit 1 year, like I'm going to quit. We were even discussing it now. Should I take a break? What should I do? And I think this is you mentioned it, where this is sort of that first wall that you hit, where you're like, oh, I don't really know if I want to like keep doing it. Like you kind of get that demotivation, you get unmotivated, you're not sure what you want to do, and I think that's when you like keep going now. In terms of balancing responsibilities and everything, I hope that I have a bit of a social life as well. I work 2 part-time jobs. Like I work with my dad. I do a bunch of other stuff on the side. And I think having the mentality, I think I wrote it on my notepad, was just like I had to do it. Like there wasn't an option of if I could do it or if I, like there was a million nights where it's like 11 p.m. Like I had to do it before midnight. And it's 11 p.m. and I'm like, I'm busy editing as fast as I can to make sure that this minute clip is up.
I remember that.
and I've got like, for example, 2 weeks ago, I went to the cottage with some of my friends, like over a weekend. And for most people, it's like, oh, sweet, we don't have work. Like we're just chilling for the weekend. But like my work follows me everywhere I go. And so even though I'm not getting paid or whatever it is, the reality is like, I need this podcast up. So I got some of it done, but like the reality is I'm like there, all my buddies are drinking. I'm like trying to edit this podcast. Like they're all messing with me, throwing eggs at me, like whatever it is. But like my head is just, this podcast has to get up. And then the next day I drive home, I'm like dead tired. And I'm like, nope, the next episode, the next clip has to come out. And it's just, I don't know. It's maybe a God gift where I have that mentality of this has to get done and I'm going to do it.
Well, I think that's raising you too, because your parents are the most resilient human beings I know. That their story, I remember growing up and hearing your dad's story. I don't know your mom's too much, but hearing your dad's story and just the resilience he's had to have over the years. And he grew up in South Africa that at the time, I don't know now, but at the time was like really not in a good place.
Yeah,
and
I would say it's even worse now.
Yeah, see,
and that's why he left. Yeah.
And that's just incredible. Like he had to be resilient through that, and that clearly came through you. But any good story has a moment where you felt at your absolute lowest, a moment, they call it the whiff of death, a moment where you were like, is there a point to this? Or something in your life, whether it was a relationship or career or money, affected you so badly that you were just like, something needs to change, or I need to figure something out. What was that moment for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. People mention that, and people mention like hardship in general, I think is something, one of the questions that I always ask, like, what is that hard moment? And I always try and
like, was there a moment that you were crying? Like I remember interviewing somebody that said, I was crying in the shower after doing $15 million this year, and I just didn't even know.
I remember that clip. And I always look at that and I'm like, am I just blessed to not have hardship, or do I have a different way of looking to hardship? But I truly don't feel like I've had a moment where I'm like all out, just like broken down. Like I very rarely, I speak a lot about emotional stability, and I love the idea that I think it's one of my strong suits. One of my questions I ask, if it's funny, we keep going back to it, but one of the questions I ask is, what is your greatest asset in terms of a mindset, a skill, something that you have personally? And for me, one of mine, I would say, is emotional stability, where on a soccer field, the other day I got punched in the face, like under the eye, like good and proper, full fist. And like for me, it was just to like, oh, I hope he's okay. Like that was the first thought I had. Like something obviously is not okay with him for him to be reacting like that. And for me, there was no reaction of like, I'm going to hurt him back, or like I'm going to attack him. Like I just don't have that. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I always thank God for just the emotional stability, the idea that...
Where did you learn that from? Because that's something, like I definitely didn't have that in my journey, and I learned it through mentors who, when I would sit down with them, no matter what problem they were going through, they were always like this, just flatlined emotion. They were never too excited, and they were never too sad about something or too stressed about something. Where did you learn that from? Because that's learned. That's not just innate, I don't think.
Yeah, you mentioned it, and I think that's an important thing that I wanted to mention was that immigrant mentality. So Sean on My First Million, I think he's Indian background, and he mentions it a lot, where when your parents, like my dad, to summarize some of the story, came from South Africa. It was like crazy, borderline war-torn, like just disaster of a country at that. Not necessarily as he was leaving, but now it's become that. And he gets to Canada just after 9/11. Like immigrants as a whole, no one wants to speak with them. No one wants to interact with them. And he's gone from a successful business person to laying phone lines in the ground for $7 an hour, right? So that's what I grew up with as like my key figure of who I was looking up to. So when I compare, I know it's not good to compare yourself with others, but I think in this sense, it's in a positive way where I go, look, there are people starving to death today. There are people that are in much worse positions that can't pay their mortgage, that their wife or husband are leaving them, their kids don't love them, whatever that is for them. I'm in a much better position. I have a car to drive to back home now. I have food on the table whenever I need it. So I think when you have that comparison in the sense that like everything that I do, I'm in the perfect position. We always talk about dealing the cards you're dealt. We've mentioned it a ton where you can almost look at yourself and go, maybe I'm in too good of a position.
Yeah. I've always, okay. So
go.
To jump on that, you said, the full fridge mentality. Like that's actually really interesting because a part of me growing up always thought that, well, because I grew up in a wealthier home where, I always had a full fridge and always had a meal to eat and a nice bed to sleep in with air conditioning if I needed, I thought that I'd never be able to achieve what I was set out to achieve because of that. But something changed in me, and it was almost like this, no, you have an obligation to live up to your fullest potential because you've been blessed by God that you were able to grow up in this situation. So talk to me a little bit about that, because that's really, like, when you say dealing with the cards that you were dealt, sometimes you're in too good of a position that sometimes you're too comfortable as well, right? There's two ways of looking at that.
Yeah, I had my friend Stefan on the podcast recently, and he spoke on perspective versus perception. And it's the idea that you might be, so he uses the example of a surfer, where a surfer might be living in Hawaii and they've surfed every day of their life. They've never been attacked by a shark. They don't know anyone that's been attacked by a shark. They've never really even seen a shark around when they're surfing, but they see a dark shadow under them and they think it's a shark. But the perspective is the reality that, look, you're going to be okay. You've never been attacked by a shark. The chances of getting attacked by a shark are so little that it probably won't happen. So for me, full fridge mentality, we mentioned it. Just because I have the full fridge doesn't mean I have to have that mentality of the idea that, okay, everything's given to me, I'm okay.
Right.
I can still have the perspective of that Brazilian young footballer who doesn't have anything. I can still have that perspective even with the full fridge. And I think that almost takes more intelligence or more maturity in the sense that, like, you have everything, but you almost have to have the mentality. And I think that's ingrained from your parents. My parents have taught me that, where my dad really has helped me, and my mom as well has helped me in any aspect. Whatever journey I've wanted to take, they've been supportive of me. But I still know that, and I still try and instill that mentality of, like, not everything is granted, and I'm not deserved of everything. I still have to work for who I'm going to become as myself. And I think a lot of, I was listening to Money Wise, which is Sam Parr, also from My First Million.
Podcast, yeah.
And he was discussing the idea of how you grow up your kids when you have wealth. And they were talking extremes in terms of families with tens of millions to hundreds of millions. And the one kid from this family, he didn't get a first class ticket for a vacation they got. I think the dad ended up going first class and the kids were in coach, and he freaked out in the airport because he wasn't in first class. And that's like the last thing I want for my kids. So I think my dad and my family as a whole, even my brother and my mom as well, did a great job of growing me up as they were willing to humble me when I needed to be humbled, but they were also willing to praise me when I'd done well. And so I think that's the beauty of it.
One of the things I'm curious, because you're talking a lot about what you've learned, but I want to know if there's one thing that you're most proud of over the last year. What would you say that this Chad is proud of the Chad that I met with at Starbucks a year ago, sitting outside on that patio, drinking a mango dragon fruit refresher? What would you say that this Chad today is proud of that Chad for?
When I first read the question, I actually didn't think of it that way. I thought more of the podcast in terms of what was I most proud of in the podcast. And I think if you look at the podcast, most proud of by far the consistency. I think there's ways you can approach something like this. You can approach it in terms of quality and making the highest quality podcast. For me, it was, okay, I have low amount of resources, but I have a ton of time. And so that was my goal, was just, I can pump as much content out as possible. So for me, 100%. Anyone who does something, I always mention this to anyone. If you've done something 365 days in a row for about 1 to 2 hours a day, when you include editing and filming and everything, please tell me, and I'll happily give you a firm handshake and applaud you, because that is incredible. Anyone that has ever done that for 2 hours a day consistently in terms of working out, whatever it is, I don't think anyone has done that, at least people that I've spoken to recently, because you miss a day or something goes wrong, you get sick, whatever it was. Like, I had fevers, I was throwing up during this. Like, I lived life still, and I still did this. Like, I was the only person behind this, so I think that's impressive. But for me as well, in terms of personal growth and like how I grew in the year, I would just say, like, it's cool for me to look back at that first episode and go like, oh, he's cute. Like, it was almost like, I'm a little guy. Like, I was like young back then. But the reality was, it was just a year ago, but it feels like it's been years because I learned so much. Like, I had so many experiences. I wrote down, like, I was able to go to MLS, the GA Cup, which is like the biggest youth tournament in North America. I was able to go to a coaching convention in LA. Like, I traveled all over the place, even after my post-Europe trip. So I think all those experiences and the, like, maturity in a sense that I grew in terms of, I had never done a podcast before. Now I could probably interview anyone here and be super comfortable about it. And like that takes a lot of growth. Right. Like you know more than anyone in that sense.
So from that front, as you look towards the future, one of the things I want to know is, the future of the podcast, how you plan on that developing, but then also how you plan on you developing in just your career in general. But first, talk to me about the podcast. What ideas do you have? Because now you've hit the 52 episode mark. I remember hitting that with my TV show and my podcast, and I was like, well, what do I do next?
Yeah, so the second promise, so I made one promise where consistency was going to be important. And sort of a second promise that goes alongside that was, once I get my goal for maybe we never really discussed this, was the goals for the podcast, what I wanted from it from the start. And a few of I never really wanted to look at the analytics. Like, that just to me wasn't, I knew it was super niche and it wasn't really gonna have a ton of growth, but I knew there was more to it than the growth of analytics. And so I looked at, like, really the networking side and the idea that I can grow relationships with this, where all these people I'm meeting, I would say 40 something out of the 52 or 51 were new people that I'd never met before we recorded. We would have a meeting before and that was it. And so for me, that was a huge part of it. And then my goal, I would say, when I started, was the idea that once I do get an opportunity from this podcast, because naturally meeting this amount of people and being able to share your story, someone's going to offer something. I didn't want to stop doing the podcast, because that just ruins the idea of the podcast. Right. I at that point, I want to double down on it and keep going. And so one huge thing I have for the future is, once I do nail down that opportunity that I feel is right for me, I don't want to stop. Like, that's when you continue going. We were talking about walls and barriers that you hit. And so for me, 100%, I want to keep going.
It's almost like that opportunity lead flow, the continuous, like how you continuously do that podcast.
Yeah, because although I'm interviewing people, it's almost like you can see my timeline and see my story and things like this. You can start to learn more about myself. Right. But I'm sure if you were listening from the first episode all the way till now, you saw the growth in me. You didn't hear the ums as much. You still hear the curiouses every once in a while, but you see growth in terms of how I matured as a person physically, but also mentally in the way I speak.
It's the idea of constantly challenging yourself and never letting yourself get mundane or lazy in what you're doing, or comfortable, I guess you could say, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. So then, in terms of the future we're discussing already, I said I don't want to stop, but then also there's so much room for growth in terms of ideas. So the one thing that I'm tied down to now is I'm the only person behind the scenes. So I'm constantly running everything. But now I'm starting to get into conversations of hiring a team, having a team around me of editors, of producers, people to help me slowly assist in these positions. And then that allows me to grow more, in-person interviews, being able to potentially fly around, if I'm going to England, if I'm going to Italy, I might as well do an interview there. I have contacts there now. Working with clubs, working with different companies that a lot of these entities want to start podcasts or want to start things in the media realm. And what a perfect person, but the person that interviewed you first. Like a lot of these people that are coming on my episodes that's the first time they've been interviewed. So then when they look to do anything in the production, media, marketing realm, I'm the first person they think of because I was the one who interviewed them. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what we shared in terms of your growth and the way you wanted to do the Meeting Gold. That was kind of always the idea that you're putting your name out there and you're slowly growing your personal brand as well as the brand of the Insider.
And you told me this, but I'll let you speak on it. What does that ultimately fall into career-wise for you? You know what you want to be.
Yeah, so for me, it's a matter of running my own business. That's how I've always seen it. And I probably could work for someone else if it was the right space and the right timing, but in many capacities, I would have to work for myself. It's just my personality and the way I'm driven. And so I see it becoming that production and media company at first, where we're helping other entities, other companies, other clubs, agencies, whatever it is, grow their media space. There's so many, I interview so many people that their personal brand might be really well lit, but then they have a holding company or something that they're invested in, and it's struggling on social media or in media as a whole. And I'm thinking, you are someone that praises the media realm and praises that this is your background, and yet a lot of your capacities are still struggling, and that just might be in terms of focus. I can't focus on everything in my business. I have parts that lack, and people see that, but that's where I can help be an assistant to that person and help them grow in that sense.
Interesting. Dream guests. I want to know, because I have some dream guests as well of mine, and I'm trying to make it happen, but it's not easy. But so for you, what would they be? And I don't know too many good soccer players, so why don't you speak on it a little bit?
Yeah, so my dad actually always asks me this. He kind of keeps me updated, like, okay, who's your dream guest? Who's your next dream guest? And what people don't know is I'm sending hundreds of messages out probably every month just to get guests on the podcast, and most won't answer. And at the start, basically none answered. Now, over time, because I've grown in terms of an image where people know the podcast, they understand what's going on, I'm slowly getting more and more of a response. And the cool thing is the guests in terms of who I would want in the future, a lot I don't know now. And that's kind of the beauty of it, where the world of global football is so big that there are people that I don't even know the names of that I want on the podcast, but I've just never met yet. And I think that's happened over the last year, but I think it'll continue to happen. In terms of specific names, Spencer Owen was also always a big one. He's a content creator. He started as a comedian, then got into YouTube, then started his own team, and now they're slowly working up the English divisions. I think they're in like Division 7 or 6, and they're slowly trying to go all the way up to 1. So that's someone where fits my story and what I want to do perfectly, where he kind of started in the media space and went into the football side and grew it. There's Joe Pompliano, I think you know of as well, where that sports business personality, someone that I look up to. So there's a lot of these types of names, and I think with time, I never believe in forcing anything. I think there's a good way where you should be insistent on wanting certain people or wanting opportunities, but I think naturally they'll occur one way or another. I know I'm going to meet them.
It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, and that's just something I don't like sit down and pray every night like, oh, please, Spencer Owen, answer my message. It's more of just I know it's going to happen, and so it's just more a prayer of being ready for the opportunity and that sort of timeline. It's not my timeline, it's God's. So
yeah, well, that's the biggest thing. Before we jump into the quick fire questions, one of the things I want to ask you is, what would future Chad hope that this Chad does today? What would Chad sitting in this chair a year from now, today, doing the same interview, hope that this Chad did and still does and learns?
I wrote on my notepad, just like in bold, commitment. And I think that's something that I'm focusing on now, where over the last year, I don't know if it's my personality or what it is, but I sometimes struggle to commit, or I'll have an opportunity and I won't fully commit. Like I'll go to an event rather than trying to like blast my podcast name all over it, like interview people, like do something like that abnormal, like that seeking discomfort. I think I do it a lot, but in certain aspects, I don't do it enough. And I think sometimes you notice that the most successful people just did the weirdest things at random times, and let's say 10 of the things didn't work, but the one did. And it just happened. Some person happened to see it. It was just an abnormal circumstance where it worked
I would
out.
love to see the Insiders Lounge, go to soccer events and interview some of the players after, interview some of the coaches. Like that would be so cool.
Yeah, so that's the idea. That commitment is what I'm focused on now. If we say the next 52 episodes, doing things like this. Like we literally... I thought of this on like Monday about doing at first it was just a one-on-one in terms of myself, just speaking to the camera. And then I thought, hey, I know Sam, I might as well send him a message. That was yesterday, and now we're here today. That's something maybe a year ago I probably wouldn't have done because, maybe Sam's busy or I don't want to bug him or I'm not quite ready. Like this morning, I was still making sure my questions were ready for this. Like I didn't know, I wasn't fully prepared, but that's the beauty of it. If you're not fully prepared, you can be 60, 70% prepared and the rest will sort itself out. And I think that's something I'm focused on.
It all falls into play. So as we quick into the quick fire questions here, I'm excited to ask you these. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it. This was, for those who don't know, I asked them at the end of every episode, but my mom actually said, can you please do the quick fire questions? I want to hear them. So this is for Mom. I'll do these.
What's one vital part of your daily routine that you believe is key to your success? Go. 20 seconds.
So it's not going to be quick fire because I do actually want to answer this in a little longer form. So I met Emiliano Marcondes recently, former Bournemouth and Brentford player. We got to travel for a bit, and I almost used the week that I spent with him as an interview, a week-long interview to understand him. And his routine was fascinating. And so quickly, I'll summarize it. But the one thing that I learned from him is his routine. And so every morning now, I wake up, I try and keep that consistent. At bed at midnight and waking up at 8 a.m. That's what I try and do, somewhere in that range. And then I wake up, I leave my phone. I now have my phone like across my room, so I can't pick it up right away. I try and keep my phone away as much as possible. Yeah. I go outside. No matter what the weather is outside, I'm in my boxers and I just stand on the grass. It's grounding, where you're connected to the earth. It's just you and the earth. I lift my head up to the sky and then I just breathe 10 deep breaths in the morning. And that it just wakes you up. It like rejuvenates you. It gives you a fantastic start to the day. And I would say that like over anything else that I do during the day, my eating habits, whatever it is, that's like the number one thing that I try and do every single morning. And it's like crazy what it does mentally. Like it just focuses you. You're like awake. You just feel like you get this totally different energy. It's similar to like if someone does an ice bath in the morning. Yeah. And that's what I do next. I just go under a cold shower and I just wash my head and my hair. And then I'm like ready to go. Like no matter what happens, like I'm ready to go.
It's bound to wake you up and make you feel grateful for the morning that you have ahead of you.
Exactly.
No, it's so true. Do you have any favorite quotes or sayings that resonate with you?
Yeah, so I'm going to pull this one up because we were speaking about it before and I was thinking like, what's my favorite quote? We have seek discomfort. We have you're crazy till you make it. We have a few of these, but the one today was actually the verse of the day. So I'll read it. It's Matthew 6:33. And it says, seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. And I think at the time of my life and where I'm at now, it's such a beautiful thing where I can just, it almost gives me no worries. Like I have nothing to worry about. As long as I can just focus on him, everything else will sort itself out.
Trust that it's going to sort itself out.
Yep.
Yeah, it works out for the better.
Exactly.
Top recommendations for hometown, food places to go.
Yeah, so this is something I wanted to discuss with you because I ask each guest, they're from New York, they're from London, they're from Paris.
You ask them that.
Yeah, and so they give me all their little insights. And for me, I think the beauty of Niagara, although sometimes I'm maybe not as grateful as I should be for growing up here, I think the beauty is the nature. So we have so many trails.
We've got the gorge.
We have Niagara Falls. We have all these beautiful spots. We have the lakes. The lakes here are like oceans for most people. And I think most people don't even live near lakes or bodies of water like that.
On nice days, we have beautiful beaches as well. We have a ton of trees. I just came back from New York, and I know you've been, and there's not a lot of trees other than Central Park.
Yeah.
There's another cool spot, Ludology, that you could play game boards at, and it's like the coolest thing ever. It's even better than spots in New York.
Yeah, we have Niagara on the Lake, the wineries,
We're the second best wine town in, I believe, North America.
I think you're not far off.
Next to
somewhere in California, I would guess.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called.
And so I think as I'm growing with age, I'm slowly starting to understand that this is home and this is where I grew up, and I have to be grateful for it, even though some of the circumstances and things around it I might not be as passionate for. And then there's so much to discover. I think that's
a book that teaches you about personal development and a book that teaches you about business. Go.
Okay, so I'll tell you, the books I do read, I focus on kind of the mix of the two, where personal development and
kind of falls together.
And football and soccer kind of all together. And so Live Yes And is actually a book that I've been listening to recently, and the author I actually had on the podcast recently as well.
You're kidding me.
Mm-hmm. And his story and his way of thinking is just unbelievable. And so I would recommend it to anyone. Live Yes And. He's got online lessons, everything you need there. But if you can just think of those words, and it's the idea, it comes from acting and improvisation.
Oh, I love that.
Improvisation, thank you. And it's the idea that when you're on stage, everything is yes and. You can never end a sentence, or else everything will fall apart. And so it's constantly that yes and. So what's next? What can you do next? How can you motivate yourself to do something else? And so live yes and. So that's a beautiful book for personal development.
I love it. I would have to say the one that totally changed my perspective recently was Start With a Why by Simon Sinek. It was incredible. And then Think and Grow Rich was what I read in high school.
I've never gotten into. I've tried to read that so many times.
I know.
It's
strictly the power of convincing yourself that you can get what you want, but particularly money. So if you're not like, you know, in high school I was.
Yeah.
Now it's more. It's interesting. I loved money in high school. Now it's 0% of my motivation, and I was trying to figure out what my motivation is, and Start With the Why kind of allowed me to figure that out.
I've got one more before we go. Giannis, a good friend of mine from London, Ontario, actually, he told me about a book called U Squared, and it's the idea of taking quantum leaps in your growth journey, and it's like a super mind-boggling, like you really got to read like one page at a time, but it's just the idea of like taking a sort of unique approach to how you grow, and it's similar to the idea of like seeking discomfort and finding new ways to just get uncomfortable, and that's where you find the most growth. Like you'll see how things unlock.
What's it called?
Unbelievable. U Squared.
U Squared.
Like the math equation.
How do you recharge yourself and stay inspired outside of work?
Yeah, so talking about my routine, I think that's something that I'm really passionate about. I have a Whoop now, and
how are they?
They're incredible. Like it's completely changes your mentality. Where I was health focused at first, I would say I've always sort of been, but now I like have it. It almost gamifies health. Where I see like I have my sleeping patterns, and I'm like, okay, I got to get to bed at this time. And
does it show you how much like what's it called, REM
yeah,
sleep?
REM sleep. And then it says like you were stressed for 14 minutes today, but you weren't working out or anything. Like what's going on? And then you can like journal about it. And so it does all these things, but it really helps keep you like, okay, I've got to focus on like. My friends will go and play soccer. We have a team together, and everyone will go for beers and whatever after. And I really try and limit my alcohol now because of this, because it really, and personal reasons as well.
So it can sense when you
yeah, no, it actually says like so I went to the cottage the other weekend. It was the first time I had drank like a good amount of alcohol in one sitting. And my recovery is normally about 95%, I would say, on average after I sleep, which is like really good. And my recovery, so I had like 4 hours sleep. I was drinking alcohol. My diet was horrible. It was 15% the next morning, and it was like the worst recovery score I've ever had. But it almost gamifies that idea that like now, when you're talking about things to keep me rejuvenated, and a routine is so important. Zane, a girl that I had on the podcast not too long ago, she spoke about routine. She went to Harvard, and it was the idea that like if she doesn't have these routines, it becomes extremely difficult to actually live life. Like she needs routines to live life, and that's something I've really fell in love with. Just routines, the way I eat, the way I work out, the way I do things. I constantly like these routines.
If you weren't in your current profession, what do you think you would be doing instead?
Yeah, I've always thought like, could I like go into trades?
Don't tell me you would be a realtor.
No, never. It's tough to see me not in the football space, not in soccer. Like, it's just such a passion of mine.
You're obsessed with it.
Yeah, I don't see myself being in.
Do you think you could have made it pro if you started at like 4 and gave up everything?
With my mentality now and the things I've learned, I would say yes, in terms of I've been in this industry now for a few years. Yeah. And now I know like Canadians, I think Canada struggles a lot with youth development in soccer, and I think North America as a whole really.
Well, and youth development's so big. Like I didn't realize, but in Europe, it's incredible. Like their youth development in soccer is like starts at 2 years old. 3 years
and it's
old.
massive. If Samuel Mealy grows up in Torino, for example, and he's supporting Juve, he sees his classmate playing for the Juventus Academy, and then he sees Pirlo playing as he's growing up, and then he sees Paul Pogba become this world-class player. So you constantly are seeing these players like that are in your town becoming the world's best players. We don't have that here, and we're slowly starting to reduce those players, but still youth development here is so far behind. And so now with my contacts and my mentality and the things I've learned, I think I could help someone in that position, and I do help players in those positions. But maybe I think I have a lot of the mentality traits to make it pro. Who knows about the skill level and so on.
Okay, I love this last question here. If you could sit down with one person for dinner, dead or alive, who would it be?
Yeah, so this is something I always ask, and something that I really thought of like, who is that person? Like, you can say all these world figures. I think for me, one connection I don't have is with my family. So my closest family in terms of my parents and my brother, super strong connection.
Yeah.
But because we moved so far away from everyone, most of our family's in Croatia, in South Africa, Argentina, so on, we never really had that connection with them. And so for me, I would love to sit down. My dad's dad died really young, like 40, and his mom died a few years ago. And then my mom's dad also died quite young. I didn't really get to meet them. So I would love just a table of them three. Like, I know it's one person, but them three, because I never really got to meet my grandparents. Like, I didn't know them.
Right.
And I think that tells so much of so much I've learned today are from my parents, and the only way they learned is from their parents. So I would love to hear their stories, and they had incredible hardship as well through the world wars and constantly just escaping one thing after the next. So I think I would love to sit down with one of the three of them. Or
I have one last question. If Chad was in the deathbed at 85 years old, what would you be most afraid of that you didn't do?
Yeah, that's, I think, something I look at where I like try each day, like, okay, this could be your last. So like, make sure you're like maximizing the potential of it. In terms of what I didn't do, I think is you can get to a point, let's say I'm at 27 years old, whatever the age is, and I'm still in this position. I'm still doing the podcast, not really making money off of it, part-time jobs, so on. I think you can get to a point where you start to realize, like, maybe all the people that were saying I'm a loser and everything, like, maybe they were right. And I think that's one of those barriers that we speak of like, maybe I will get tested to that point, and I hope that I don't then let go and give up. Because if I do give up, then I've never reached my maximum potential. I know that the dreams and the aspirations that I have are God-given. And so if I don't reach the maximum potential of those dreams and even beyond those dreams.
So give every day like it's your all.
Yeah, then I would feel like I failed myself. Like, if I'm there at 85 and I just sort of lived a regular 9-to-5 life for the rest of my life, I would know inside that I failed, and then that would like hurt. Like, that's like some next level, like emotional, like an emotional thing to think about.
Well, hey, listen, I appreciate you allowing me and trusting me to be the one to interview you. It's cool to watch you grow, because you've been able to see me grow and what I'm doing, but now to be able to watch you grow, it's really awesome to see somebody my age pursuing everything that they've wanted to pursue and just try it with no fallback option. So it's fantastic. I'm proud of you. And I think a lot of people are. I think your parents definitely are. And yeah, I appreciate you. I appreciate you doing this. And I think it's great that you did this for your final episode. No, I appreciate it. First of all, thanks for you. Thanks for the setup. If anyone, I'll put the links below. Vision Lux, look it over, have a look at it. I appreciate that. We'll film some soccer games or something. Thanks for your time, for your friendship. It always means a lot. I know we always get along quite well, and it's always good to connect. So thanks for everything. And yeah, to another 52 and beyond. To another 52. Thanks, Chad. Take it easy.